SMS is the most powerful marketing channel.
Stronger than ever.
The best and most effective personal communication channel.
The trials and tribulations of verification.
And we don't have all the answers.
How do you ratchet up the value of every message?
Finding that happy medium is in text.
Welcome back to the State of Business Texting podcast. Today, sad, but we're wrapping it up, Caitlin. We are wrapping up season one.
It has been a journey.
It has been a great journey.
Thank you for being on this journey with me.
You bet. And right back at you.
Thanks.
It's been really fun. But we're really excited today to be sharing a little bit about our predictions for the industry this year and beyond. And we've got a very familiar face or voice for our podcast listeners. We are back joined by our VP of Messaging, Mr. Brad Roldan.
Thank you, Zach. Thanks, Caitlin. It's always great to have these conversations with you guys.
In person, nonetheless.
In person this time, yeah.
Yeah.
So exciting. So good. Caitlin, you hit on it. We have covered a lot of ground in season one. We've covered 10 episodes where we hit on a variety of topics. A few of those were all about what are the options out there as you're thinking about A2P messaging. What are the channel options that you have access to? What are the OTT options, the over-the-top options, things like WhatsApp or RCS? We talked about how there is an emerging use case and customer desire to use richer media, things like MMS or the likes of RCS or WhatsApp. We got to interview a number of our customers who are in different industries like healthcare and e-commerce. And then we talked a little bit more about finance because we are the experts in finance, Caitlin. That is true.
100%.
100%.
Us too. Only.
But then we also got to talk about, it's not just messaging, as a lot of our listeners are thinking about how they go to market with their product. They're thinking about other channels like voice or email or others. So we talked about the interplay specifically of voice and messaging. And then we just got to talk about AIT or artificially inflated traffic, which is a big prevalent form of fraud that's happening in our global SMS markets. So a lot there.
We covered some ground. Yeah, for sure.
We really did. We were running fast. But again, we're here today. We just took a look back. Now let's take a look forward. So everyone pull out your crystal ball, shake it up, and I'm going to toss it over to Caitlin.
I like the 8-ball too. Can I shake up my 8-ball?
I think so.
Okay.
You can shake up whatever you want.
Right, yeah. 80s baby over here. So gotta shake up my 8-ball. So if we're looking at all those topics that you just covered, yes, we covered a lot of ground. I think that it was necessary because when you look at the messaging space, you see, and I think I've said this before, the high volume and high velocity of change. Just in the span that we've actually been doing this podcast, we've seen changes with regards to compliance best practices, changes in the toll-free space, changes in the 10DLC space. We've seen the changes in the global messaging ecosystem when you look at the announcements around RCS and some of those other new and emerging channels. And so I think that's really what I want to focus on today is when we're looking at the channel optionality, a lot of which we've touched on in some form or fashion across all those topics that you just discussed, Zach, is what is kind of the overall theme there? What is the level of stability that we'll see going forward? And I think that when we're thinking about the US market, I want to be a bit of an optimist. Brad, you and I actually were just at the messaging ecosystem forum in Miami. And when we were talking with industry leaders there, one of the themes that kept coming up was the need for more stability across the A2P channels in the US and Canada. And I think there's some truth to that. Like, I think we will see some of that in the US. I think globally, there may be more of a shakeup coming with some of the RBM and RCS updates. So my prediction or my crystal ball is stability in some places and the continuing chaos in other channels. And so I'm just curious, Brad, on sort of what your perspective is there.
I don't know that we're too far off from each other. I think about the changes that have happened in the industry. And when I think about messaging platforms, enterprise users who are depending on the messaging ecosystem, what I try and instill is, you know what, we've got an ecosystem of experts who are trying to bring operational predictability, right? We actually, it takes a lot of work to make the messaging channel boring to get a message from point A to point B. And I always say, like, you think about your experience as a consumer, you text, it just works. And you never think about all the mechanics behind the scenes that have to be functioning correctly for the messages to get between two locations. When you're operating at scale, like you're a large enterprise, something is bound to go wrong. And that's where I think the industry is investing right now for near-term success and stabilization, to your point, Caitlin, of the channel. I think it's the operational simplicity that we are all hoping for. Because let's be honest, nobody wants to have a dedicated messaging engineer on staff. You want to have a marketing expert on staff, a CX expert on staff. And messaging is simply a channel that you engage with. So 100% with you on that. And then, of course, this is big, looming, exciting change in the industry called RCS that nobody can stop talking about. And I do believe that it will be game-changing in the industry, not in one country in particular, but across the world, because this is truly the only alternative channel that we have access to today that's on the horizon that doesn't require an app download. And that, when you juxtapose that against the promises of the OTTs, you're getting almost all the same benefits without having to tie yourself into a single ecosystem.
I actually really love that, what you said a minute ago. It takes a lot of work to make it boring.
Yes.
So, and we've seen that on the stabilization of some of the A2P channels. It has taken a lot of work, short amount of time, high volume velocity of change. I think when we look at RCS, I want to maybe pick on that more, because if one theme is stability, I would offer that another theme is just the move towards richer media options, which RCS is a great bastion of, right? And I think that there will be a lack of stability as we're moving towards that channel, but that's really kind of where the market's moving, right?
Yeah. And I mean, we've seen that. So if anyone's gotten to take a glance at our state of messaging report, we've got a ton of data out there that shows just how desirable moving to richer media options are for customers. So example, a large CRM company that we work with, they actually saw 45x ROI on MMS messages versus that of 37x ROI on SMS. So still really large numbers for both, but you can clearly see that there's a delta between MMS and SMS. And so, Brad, know that you have a ton of conversations with our customers. They're continuously exploring, how do I get more out of my dollar? How do I get more out of my marketing spend? How do I get people to convert at higher rates? And richer media, if I were to shake up my crystal ball, I would think people are going to continue to look at MMS, RCS, additional channels that are able to offer that experience. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I think the point on the richer media, it is way more engaging when you're looking for that true kind of CX, making your content accessible. And even if you're not just, including simple videos, simple pictures, even including things like emojis, such a simple change in your messaging actually does drive more engagement. And so I totally agree with you. I would also say that when I think about, and I'm sorry to stick on RCS for a second, but I'm going to talk about for just a little bit longer, and that is, we take for granted, for most of us in the United States and Canada, we take for granted that MMS just works on our phones. But you go around the world and that doesn't exist. RCS represents the first transition to bring rich media natively into the handset. And again, I'll go back and say, without downloading a new app. That's what's so game-changing for users around the world, is now you do have a rich, hopefully in the future, you'll have a rich channel to engage on.
So it's almost like what you're saying is the democratization of rich media, like everyone having access to it.
It's also not a closed ecosystem.
Exactly.
WhatsApp is a great, and if you're going overseas, for us in the US, when we travel over into Europe, I always use my WhatsApp.
Yep.
WhatsApp is also, if you're looking at like demographics and where to reach individuals, like certain demographics in the US, also very prevalent within certain demographic channels. And so if you're creating a strategy of rich media, looking at where to meet the market is really important. However, when you look at a channel like WhatsApp, it's still a very closed ecosystem. And so with that RCS and RBM development, which we're throwing that that acronym around a lot, Brad.
Right.
And just,
do we need to define it for
I was going to say,
our audience?
actually, that may be helpful if you kind of distinguish when people hear RCS and RBM, like what the difference is and just what that means in general for opening up that rich media.
Our RCS, right? So if you go rewind to one of our earlier podcasts, Rich Communication Services, RBM is an acronym of RCS business messaging. So typically people use the terms interchangeably, but if you hear the term RBM, it's very specific to business messaging. RCS can, it's just more of a generic form of just better messaging on the handset.
Yeah. So thank you for doing that. On that track, back to the closed ecosystem, when you're looking at the RCS, RBM channels interchangeably, the business channel as well as the personal channel, you have access to those channels more broadly versus just through an individual application.
Yes. Caitlin, as you bring that up, I love that you brought that up. So if I could borrow your 8-ball again and shake it up, because I think I need another go at the crystal ball now. I just think about, we have demographics. To your point, there are specific demographics within the United States, around the world, who have already gravitated towards OTTs.
Right.
We got a new channel, RCS, which it's not in a closed ecosystem. Everyone can use it without downloading an app when it becomes ubiquitous on everyone's phones, right? I do wonder if there will be a transition for CX experts, for engagement experts, to think about a fragmentation across channels. And I wonder if that's actually going to be one of the next big challenges for marketers and CX experts to overcome over the next, 3 to 5 years.
Interesting. I actually think that's where we'll probably start to see some more of the utilization of AI within the space. One could make the educated guess. And we actually know one of our customers had an announcement this week, a really cool product announcement where they're embedding AI into their communications and allowing customers access to better serve their customers and end users by providing just smarter, more intelligent insights. And I imagine that when we're looking at how could AI apply to the space, to messaging, to communications, to business texting, channel optionality and figuring out where the right place is to meet your market, that feels like a really optimal use of AI.
Caitlin, I love that because it's actually a great application of AI to actually take some of the thinking away from the day-to-day of a CX person, a CX designer, the marketer, where you no longer have to think about the ecosystem as a collection of channels and which channel you're optimizing for. You now actually have help. AI can actually help make that decision for you and not just optimize on the right channel. Their AI can also help you optimize for time of day, optimize for which customers are going to respond better to different types of campaigns. And so those are great use cases that we're seeing in the market actually going live today.
And I love that we're talking about our customers. I think even messaging providers, folks like Bandwidth in this space, I think we're also starting to think about how can we use AI and ML models to help with some of the processes that are really cumbersome and manual, things like vetting and campaign registration, and how can we use models to help with the process-oriented workflows that you were just kind of referencing, Brad.
Yeah. So the problems at scale, like it's easy to do something one time, but when you have to do it millions of times over and over, and there's patterns, easy patterns to pick out, these are actually things that AI actually plays a really great role in, and just trying to help streamline everything and really only surface the anomalies that require true human attention.
That's really great to hear. Before we move on, let's hear a quick word from our sponsor.
Each time the Earth circles the sun, 2.1 trillion text messages are sent through space. But of those, how many make a true difference? This year, we're going on a quest, a search to find the rare senders who've mastered the delicate balance of channel strategy and who found ways to massively improve life on this planet. Are you one of these rare creatures? See award prizes and rules at bandwidth.com/texties.
And not to be the Debbie Downer, but for all...
Come on,
can you say that?
I know, not to be him, but I am gonna. Not to be him, but for all the good that AI is bound to do and bring innovation into the space, I think we have to acknowledge that if we take our crystal ball and shake it up, AI is going to also be a big portion of fraud, spam, furthering of artificial inflated traffic or SMS traffic pumping schemes. I mean, we've seen that market problem grow exponentially. So some of the stats out there that we've seen is somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 35 billion messages last year were actually attributed to AIT. And of the total pool of traffic that was happening internationally, about 5% of that was comprised of artificially inflated traffic. So there is a problem. I would kind of frame it under this umbrella of fraud, right? So AIT is one of those aspects of fraud, but there are numerous other places that fraud and spammy traffic is taking place. So
AIT, not to be confused with AI.
Correct.
So we made a hard pivot to it's related topics of AI's impact, obviously, on the fraud curve and staying ahead of that fraud curve. And then AIT, artificially inflated traffic, being a big part of the fraud space as well.
100%. Yeah. So AIT, not to be confused with artificial intelligence traffic. It's actually artificially inflated traffic. Good distinction. So maybe I could toss it over, Brad, just thinking about fraud in the next year and how we're already seeing in the United States and globally that carriers they're cracking down on how can we make sure that this channel remains wanted and actually desired and paid attention to by end users. What are you expecting this year to look like and that of staying vigilant against fraud?
There's two aspects to that, and all of it is in the spirit of maintaining consumer confidence, maybe maintaining confidence with mobile subscribers. And I think one is Caitlin mentioned earlier, kind of the normalization of access into all of the channels. And so if you were to engage in a messaging channel today, you would find the registration process is different. The campaign vetting experiences are actually different per channel. And so as an industry, we're moving more towards a unified, consistent expectation. So that's step one is like, if we've already know where the high bar is, let's make sure it's consistent across all channels to make them all equally difficult for the fraudsters to operate in. But the second one though, Zach, I think is more kind of very much crystal ball in what we expect. It almost feels like there's an arms race that's going to be teed up, right? If there's enough money to be made in fraud, it's like who can outspend the other using AI to their advantage. Guaranteed, companies in the ecosystem are using AI to help detect and prevent fraud. And we're not unique in the messaging industry. This has been going on, but long before we're calling it AI, there's data scientists that have been doing this across the finance industry, right? Because there's a lot of money to be made in finance fraud. Same thing happening in the messaging ecosystem. But the tools are so accessible now, right? We got open source, you got cloud computing that's dirt cheap. It's also not that difficult for fraudsters to engage with the same types of tools to drive bad traffic. And so I think what we'll expect to see is this kind of almost cat and mouse game that's going to evolve over time until the channel becomes too expensive to try and commit fraud.
And I think for all of our listeners out there, you're clearly interested in business text messaging right now. And so I think that last point you just said is we're at risk of businesses and consumers starting to look for other channels.
And we see this like play out in social media. You've got deep fakes of the president saying something completely absurd or presidential candidates saying something absurd. And it's becoming more and more difficult to tell reality from made up.
It's a real problem.
Yeah.
I mean, my parents, I'm sort of like IT and AI support for them where is this real?
Yeah.
Sometimes I have to really dig in and try and figure it out. Is this an actual thing or is this generated via some sort of AI engine? And so this is an important topic. This is actually the panel that I was just on at MEF Miami where we're talking about trust in business messaging, and Somos actually led the panel. And there is the Dutch saying, which I think Dave Stewart pulled this into the title, which was fantastic. It's trust arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. Apparently this is a Dutch saying about trust, which I love. It's slow to build trust.
Yep.
You eventually find your way somewhere. It is a foundation that you lay and you build that house really slowly, and it can be destroyed much more quickly than it takes
Rapidly.
to build. And so we saw that kind of happen with email. And it is true to a point, although I will say there's always the leading indicators that we know that something is starting to happen with the shift. And I think we know right now that AI is a big threat. It's a potential threat to the space. And so what can we do to get ahead of it? Right now, all of the stats still point towards immense trust and preference in business messaging. And so it's just conversations like these are necessary, because then we can say, okay, well, we know that AI has the immense potential to be a massive disruptor in the fraud space. So what can we do? And I think the answer to that is implement those AI tools into our own vetting tools, into our own networks, into our own system and processes, where we're staying ahead of the tactics that are being used by individuals with nefarious intent to, commit some
abuse
type
trust.
of fraud or,
Yeah.
or criminality. Right, exactly.
Yeah, for sure. Is there a happy note in any of this? This is a lot of doom and gloom.
I think the happy note is the fact that we've made so much progress in the last year, and the fact that there are so many ways that we can use AI and other technologies, rich texting and business communications, to just leverage the efforts that we're all doing on a day-to-day basis to just create more space for innovation.
While we were hitting on a doom and gloom story, I think it's a lot more, we're waving some yellow flags as potential risks. I think you said it well, which is it's got the immense potential to cause some headaches and some problems. And we're starting to see some early signs of that. But I think as folks in the industry are staying vigilant around it, how do we fight fraud? How do we make sure that AI is doing good, not bad? I think we're all well positioned to take it head on.
There's a lot of changes coming.
One final point, we talk about all the risks, and I think it's important. Like that's the whole point of this podcast series, is like you're hearing the behind the scenes. These are the real topics that industry experts worry about and lose sleep over day and day again. I do think it's worth, as a listeners at home or in your car, or wherever you're listening to this, like you need to be thinking about, is my provider doing this on my behalf?
Yep.
Right. And so, yes, there's doom and gloom out there, but it's your provider's job. And certainly we take that seriously at Bandwidth. We think about how do we help our customers get the best possible experience. And we make real investments in these areas.
Brad, I love what you said, because you hit on something that was the whole idea of this podcast. You hit on having conversations that we feel like the industry either isn't talking about or maybe isn't getting as much limelight. And that was the whole idea of this podcast, was to have conversations that may be easy to talk about. There may be a pretty bow that we can tie around it, or engage in some discussions that are tough and challenging and ongoing problems for the industry.
Yeah, completely agree. There's a lot of change that we've seen just in this podcast. There is a lot of change coming to the messaging industry, and I think there is a lot to look forward to as well. This is a wrap on season 1, but I would invite every one of our listeners to stay tuned for more updates, more conversations, and more education from our team. And just as a reminder, you can always access the full State of Messaging report at stateofmessaging.com. Thank you so much, Brad. And to my esteemed co-host, Zach, this has been a really awesome highlight of my day for the last couple of months.
It really has.
Yeah.
It's been awesome. Thanks so much, Caitlin. Thanks, Brad.
Oh, so lovely to be here. Thank you.